Welcome to Life, Love, and Therapy. I am Jumi Olawale. This show is about learning tips, advice, and ideas about how to improve our lives and relationships from the viewpoint of a therapist. I am so happy to have Daree Allen on Life, Love, and Therapy today. We are going to be talking about what it's like to grieve after losing a spouse. So I'm going to have Daree introduce herself to you. I'm so excited to hear her introduce herself to you.
Thank you, Jumi. Thank you for allowing me to be on the podcast. You were on my podcast not that long ago, and I appreciate you inviting me to be on as well to talk to your listeners. As she said, my name is Daree, and I'm a speaker, I'm an author, I'm a life coach, I'm a voice talent, I'm a podcaster, I'm a mom, I'm a widow. I'm so many things, but none of those labels really define me. For the purposes, though, of the introduction, I will say that I like to help women and empower them and use my voice for good, and using my voice literally and figuratively, because, in this day and age, there's so many of us as women and women of color that our voices have been silenced for so long. And we need to kind of support each other and lift each other up. And so, again, I appreciate you for allowing me to be on your platform and to spread some of that love and empowerment around.
Thank you so much. I am so happy to have you here. And I feel so grateful and thankful that you are willing to have this conversation. I know that you've talked about this on your podcast, so I hope that people will go check it out as well. And we'll be giving that information at the end of this interview. For my listeners' sake, I would like you to share, Daree, what happened and how you became a widow.
Yeah, so it's actually a pretty interesting story. Like, not really, super happy and funny story, but kind of interesting because I did something that I normally would never, ever advocate anyone to do, which is that I got married to a man that I met online after knowing him for just 2 months. So that usually blows people's minds when I tell them that, because people that know me, they know how I'm very measured. I'm sure you're familiar with the Briggs-Myers tool. And, I'm an ENTJ. So I think things through. I'm very logical. I can be creative, but I'm more so on the logical and technical side. I like a lot of information. I like to analyze things. I don't jump into things head first and go with my heart. I go with my head. And so for me to do that, for me to marry someone that I barely knew, that was really a big deal. But before I did that, I did not take that lightly. I did not jump into it without any thought, just not as much as I normally would have. Even though I was 39 when I got married, this was my second marriage. I got married when I was 39 to him. And I talked to my parents because I respect them so much, and because I, want this data, right? And so I talked to them. I told them everything that I possibly knew about him. I told them that he was diagnosed with end-stage renal disease, which meant that, according to the doctors, that he had about 18 months to live.
Wow.
He lived a little bit longer than that, but I met him a few months after they told him that. So technically, when I met him, he had about maybe 15 months to live, even though he lived longer. And so I talked to my parents about this, and I went over it with my sister, who I'm close with, and I went over it with not a whole lot of people, but just people that I really respect. And so my siblings and my parents, I talked to about this, and I said, I really feel like he is very different from all the other men that I've dated. At the time, I was living in Atlanta, and I don't know how familiar you are with Atlanta, but and a lot of people say this about their cities, but Atlanta, I found it very, very difficult dating there. And I went to the online dating thing as a very last resort. Like, I wasn't even going to do it. But it's such a spread out place, and I've been working from home since 2005. I mean, I pretty
Wow.
much do the same thing, ABC every day. So I wasn't going to run into anybody, especially when people kind of like to stick to their counties or their neck of the woods.
Yeah.
Atlanta is a vast place. So even if someone says that they live there, same thing with DC and many other cities, they may not live in the city proper. They might live like right in the suburbs and stay in the suburbs. And
Mm.
so that's the way it was for us. I was living in one county and he was way down on the south side, someplace that I would never go, frankly. And so we met online, and I just noticed that when we got together that he treated me in a way that other men in the 7 or 8 years that I had lived in Atlanta did not treat me. He was a little different from other men that I had met because he was very thoughtful and attentive to me. And when I say these things, you're going to be like, okay, everybody should be like that, but they're not. He was very
Right.
thoughtful and attentive to me. He didn't just try to jump in bed with me. He cared about everything I had to say. And like, you could pretend to listen to people, but he really listened. And he got attached to me very quickly. There's lots of things about our relationship that even before we said I do, he stood way apart from the pack in the
Mm.
the previous years of my single life, because between the two husbands that I've had, I was a single mom for 12 years. So it
Mm.
wasn't just that I was looking for a partner for me, but it had to be somebody that would respect me as a parent and respect my child. And so I ticked off the boxes for him, and no one else had treated me that good and was interested in a monogamous relationship. And so that is the main reason why I said, yeah, to him as far as being in a relationship. But the part about us getting married so quickly had to do with his illness. I've been with my company. It's been 20 years that I've been with my company, and I've survived a lot of mergers and acquisitions and takeovers and stuff. And I have a lot of vacation time and great benefits and things, along with me doing work on the side in my entrepreneurial businesses. And so I said, you're not going to be turned away for like basic medical care. He had like one of those kind of like Affordable Health Care Act, aka Obamacare plans.
Yeah.
And they didn't really cut the mustard when it comes to, going to urgent care and, prescriptions and things. You could get a little bit of health care, but nothing close to what somebody like him would need. Not even what someone like me would need. And I'm healthy.
Yeah.
But, if you have an Obamacare plan, I love President Obama, but the plans, whoever designed those plans, they're lacking a lot. And really, my whole experience with my husband really opened my eyes to the horrible, horrible way that we treat sick people in this country, and
Mm.
how our healthcare system is just so incredibly broken. I mean, I knew it was broken before I met him, but being with him and going to the doctors all the time and all this, it was crazy. It really opened my eyes. And, there was a time in our marriage, we were married just under 2 years before he passed away. And there were times where he and I would have to go to the doctors 3 or 4 days a week. The
Wow.
doctors open 5 days a week, and we would have to go 3 or 4 days a week, and sometimes more than one doctor, because he had like at least 10 doctors. He had his primary care, and then he had all these others, a gastroenterologist and all these different kinds of doctors. And then, he was taking more than 20 pills, per day, more than 20 prescriptions. It got to be crazy. It didn't start
Wow.
off that way. It started off with him still working. He was doing his own thing. He was a mechanic, and he was a mobile mechanic. So he would like go drive around Atlanta and work
Mm.
on people's cars, and he loved it. But the sicker he got, the worse and more hazardous it became for him to do that. There were
Yeah.
times where he would pass out under someone's car for,
Oh.
who knows how long. And I mean, I don't care if it's winter or summer, being passed out under a car is not the place to be.
Yeah.
So at a certain point, and some of this was because of his illness and his medications, his mother and I put our foot down and said, you're not going to be able to do this anymore. We know you love working, and for a man to not work, usually that's a really big blow to them
Yes.
and their
Mm-hmm.
esteem. But he just couldn't. He was disabled. And then, of course, there was the fight to get disability. I'm sure you know, applying for disability in this country is another ordeal in
Oh,
itself.
man.
You can be legitimately disabled and you'll be denied a minimum of 3 times. Minimum.
Yes.
I've never heard of anyone applying for disability and getting it the first time they tried.
Right.
And he eventually went on dialysis, and, at a certain point he fell. And because of the issues with diabetes and him having neuropathy and not being able to feel anything in his feet, his foot got infected and it had to be amputated. So he was amputated on one leg from the knee down.
Wow.
And that's when everything really went downhill, is after the amputation, because you want to talk about, first of all, not being able to work and do the things that you've been doing for the first 40 years of your life, right? And then you lose a whole body part. I can't even imagine what that must feel like. And so one thing after the other, after the other, after the other kept on happening. And I mean, I could probably spend 2 hours talking about all the things that happened. But the point is that I decided to be with him because of who he was and not his circumstance. It meant that in the beginning, I had a therapist in the beginning, and she said, why do you want to sign up to be someone's caregiver? And I was super naive, Jumi. I was like, oh, he's doing everything himself. What are you talking about? Because he was independent at the time. He was doing his own thing. He was driving. He was living his life. He had his own apartment, all that. But it got worse and worse and worse and worse. So I did, that last year of his life, I was his caregiver pretty much. I want to say maybe the last 6 months of his life was without his leg that I just mentioned. So it was only like at the very end that happened, and he had to go to a hospice. So his last few months of life were in hospice. But so I wanted to give that backstory just to kind of talk about an overview kind of what I went through, and I'm sort of glossing over it really. But just because I had an idea that he wasn't going to be with me very long, did not mean that the grief was any less or any easier to deal with than someone who experiences the loss of a person suddenly. So, there's different kinds of grief, right? Because of we're all different and we all have different relationships with the people that we lose. Matter of fact, the day that my husband fell and messed up his foot, I was out of town. I was in New York at my grandmother's funeral. And I don't grieve over my grandmother because of the kind of relationship that we had and the kind of person that she was, not just for me, but for many people in my family that can co-sign my experience. So it doesn't mean that I didn't love her, but my grief with losing her was completely different from my grief with losing my husband because of, what that person meant to me and what we shared together and things like that. So, there's a meaning that we ascribe to our relationships that colors our grief.
Yes.
So that's something that I think people need to understand, is that, some people want to say, oh, well, they never even cried or they didn't go to the funeral or whatever. And I've sometimes had those moments myself, but you just really can't tell. You just can't judge just because of what you see someone do or not do, whether or not they're hurting, whether or not they're dealing with the grief in their own way. You just don't know unless you talk to them and they tell you, look, I didn't care about him. And so what do I got to cry over him for? Now, if they just come out and tell you that, then maybe that's the truth, or maybe they're just trying to hold back and save face. But the point is just that I think that we shouldn't be so quick to judge each other's decisions for how we go through grief. And some of it we don't even choose, it comes and goes in waves. And what I've been told, it's only been a year and change for me. So I'm not like a super big expert on this. But what I can tell you is that the grief does change. I don't think it'll ever go away. I don't think anyone can ever say, oh, you need to just get over it and get on with your life. You need to start dating again, or you need to move on. You cannot tell people that. That is hugely insulting to that person and the memory of that person that they're grieving over, to say, get over them.
Right.
Would you want someone to just forget about you when you die? I mean, we're all going to die. Is that how you want someone to talk about you? Oh, well, you know what, Jumi, don't worry about him. It's whatever.
Yeah.
No, that's super insensitive. Super insensitive. You cannot talk to people like that, and you cannot assume things just by the outward appearance of what you see.
Mm. You know, in the United States, when someone loses a family member and they're working, they have a certain amount of time off and then they have to be back to work. I know that you work at home. How was it for you when you had to return to work after your husband passed away?
It was really surreal. And I'll tell you why. It was helpful that I was able to stay home, but in a way it wasn't. And what I mean by that is that I had spent months taking care of my husband, driving him to all these different appointments, making sure at the end I needed to feed him. He couldn't use his hands. Okay. It was intense. And when he was gone, I'm in this big 5-bedroom house, 3,000 square feet. And I still got my daughter, but she's going to school. She's doing her thing. And I'm just in the house by myself. The TV isn't on. There's nobody to talk to anymore, you know. So even though I worked from home and I didn't have to run off to different appointments and things, it was still something that I noticed. It was
Yeah.
very obvious. I had to notice it. I couldn't, take my mind off of it. I would go downstairs and go get something to eat. And that was downstairs was the place where my husband spent the latter months of his life because he couldn't use the stairs after a while. There were several months at the end where we could not sleep together anymore because the master bedroom was upstairs and he couldn't use the stairs. He lost his foot. I'm granted there were times that he would scoot all the way up the stairs on his bum and come up into the room to use the shower because, we had 2 wheelchairs. And so he would finagle his way with one wheelchair and then grab the other one at the top and crawl and do whatever because he was a man and he was determined.
Mm.
But really, it was just crazy. Losses were happening along the way before he actually died. There was the
Mm.
loss of intimacy. There was the loss of being together. There was the loss of him being able to be independent. Many, many, many losses. And so going downstairs to get something to eat or do whatever, and all of a sudden he's not there anymore. He's not on the couch. He's not in the hospital bed that we had in the living room. He's not there. There's no
Mm.
TV on. It's quiet. It's just it's different.
Yeah,
It's
so
surreal.
it's like now you have all this time in your hands that you used to do intense things, to take care of your husband, and now you're at home by yourself and he's not there.
Yeah. And, you know, there's a part of me that was obviously very sad, devastated. I lost my best friend. I didn't have anyone to talk to anymore. But then there was a tiny part of me that was, do I dare say, relieved. And
Mm.
I felt guilty about that relief, Jumi. I felt bad about feeling relieved. Now, I'm not relieved that he is dead. I did not want him
Right.
to die.
Right.
But the relief was just of the caregiver responsibilities of hearing him in pain and not being able to help him because he was on a ton of opioids that just were not doing the job. I
Mm.
mean, it's just a really horrible thing to see someone you love suffer and you're giving them medication or they're in the hospital and the nurses are giving medication and they just can't get comfortable. They just can't, you know, they've got IVs attached to them or whatever and they just look miserable. That's a
Mm.
terrible thing to witness.
Mm.
And so there was relief, even though I felt guilty at first about it. Like, why do I feel relief? Well, I'm glad that he's not in pain anymore. I'm glad
Right.
that I'm not running around like crazy because I was really lacking in the self-care department during all this.
Mm.
For super lacking in the self-care. I mean, you can know all you want to know about self-care and doing things for yourself, but I didn't do it as much as I should have. I gained a
Mm.
ton of weight. I stopped running and exercising the way I used to. I was somewhat isolated because we were in an area where he grew up, and I didn't really know anyone there. The last couple years that I was in Georgia, I wasn't in Atlanta. I was outside of Atlanta in another city about 2 hours away because his children lived there, and he had grown up there, and he had family there and friends. And so we figured, that would be a little bit more supportive. In some ways it was, but in some ways it isolated me because I didn't really know anybody else.
Yeah.
And so I tell you, from the moment that I knew he was gone until I actually moved out of Georgia, that was really rough times. I mean, I really, really needed support and friendship and to do things and to have fun. But the city was much smaller than Atlanta. And I didn't really know anybody like that. And it was like once he was gone, I really didn't have much communication with his children or, his friends. It was kind of like when he left, they forgot about me too.
Yeah.
That's just the truth. I just feel like when you are friends with someone or close to someone who has lost someone, do not alienate them. They might need some time alone, but don't ask what you can do. Just check on them. Just talk about whatever and let them bring it up if you feel like you don't know what to say. I feel like sometimes we don't know what to say until we say things like, how are you holding up or whatever. And it's like, I don't know how to answer that. That answer is going to change from moment to moment.
Absolutely.
But I do need someone that I care about to be nearby, to give me a hug or just sit there and just sit with me. Maybe we're not talking at all,
Yeah.
but just your presence, is healing to me because I know I'm not alone because you took the time out of your day to come visit me and see how I'm doing or to call me.
Yeah.
Texting, I don't really know if that's, a big gesture when it comes to grief. But if you call someone or if you get face to face with someone on a Skype or something, or if you go visit them, that will make a world of difference to someone that feels alone, Another thing that I advocate for people that are grieving or people that are supporting people that are grieving is to look out for programs in your community that support grief. There's an excellent program that I have been a part of, both in Georgia and here where I live now in Virginia. And it's all over, and it's called Grief Share. And most of the time you'll find them at churches, but I think if you go to griefshare.org, you can find all different places where they hold meetings. And it's basically about a 12 or 13 week program. They don't always go the full length of the book. There's like that's how many lessons they have. So that's how many weeks they meet. And there's a DVD that goes with it. And it's a group setting. So it's very supportive if you need someone to talk to about your grief, because pretty much everyone in the room can kind of relate.
Yeah.
Everyone that's there has been through it before. Everyone there has lost someone that was close to them. So instead of getting thoughtless comments like, well, you should just move on and get over it, you're going to hear people really talk about how they're coping. Maybe they're having issues with the person's clothes and their belongings, and they don't want to touch their bedroom. They don't want to move anything. They feel overwhelmed. They don't even want to go in the room. Just all different kinds of stories. And it's so healing, Jumi. I don't have to tell you this, to be able to talk to someone about your emotions and let them out and know that you're not alone.
And you know that they understand.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell me, this is a great segue because you said that this is probably done in a church or a place of faith. So I have two questions for you. One side is, how has losing your husband impacted the way that you see yourself? And what I mean by that is the change in identity from wife to being a widow. And then the other one is, was there any impact on your faith? Positive, negative, everything in between?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I'll start with the faith piece first because that's right at the forefront of my mind. I can tell you that quickly. Even the months leading up to the end, when I could see physical changes in my husband that let me know that there was no turning back, as a life coach, this also hit me hard, is that I started to run out of encouraging things to say as far as like new and different things to say. I believe that God has a plan for everyone. I don't think that it's his will for any of us to suffer and die a horrible death, but it happens. And it's because of not only things that we don't understand, but things that we can kind of understand, like poor life choices, things that we've done in the past. Maybe there's something that he did in the past that contributed to this poor health. I'm not blaming him. I'm not saying that it did, but
Right.
sometimes things happen and there is no apparent reason. And I just happen to believe that God is sovereign. And that means that he's in control of everything. And so there's some things that he allows and there's some things that he will not allow. And the rationale for what he decides to let happen to us here on earth and what he doesn't let happen is a mystery and will forever remain a mystery. And so I felt myself losing hope. I felt myself losing faith, not my faith in God, but just not being very helpful to him. And so when I lost him, I continued to feel low. I continued to kind of feel like, you know, this is this is terrible because I finally met someone that wasn't like all those other jerks that I
Yeah.
was dealing with for 10 years. And I got a lousy, 18 months or 20 months with him. That's all
Yeah.
I got. Why couldn't I have met him, when I first moved to Georgia? But there's so many different things that we don't understand. A lot of us play that what if game. Well, what if I had done this? Or what if I had done that? Or what if he had done that? We will never know. There's this movie called, and I'm sure this is not the only one, but I'm thinking about this right now. There's a movie with Gwyneth Paltrow that's called Sliding Doors. I think maybe it came out in 2001 or something like that. It's not a
Yeah.
new movie.
Yeah.
But in that movie, it shows half of the movie, it shows you what her life was like when she caught an elevator, and half of the movie shows you what her life was like when she didn't catch the elevator. And it's just that one little thing that changed everything as far as this film is concerned. And so I feel like sometimes those of us that are suffering and in pain, emotional pain, we dig and make the grief worse because we start thinking about this what if scenario and creating all these fantasy things about what life is supposed to be like, or I shouldn't be dealing with this right now, because I have those thoughts. I've been
Yeah.
having those thoughts of, my life isn't supposed to look like this. My life isn't supposed to be this way. And he was having those thoughts while he was sinking further and further down in health. My life
Yeah.
isn't supposed to be like this. I'm supposed to be working. I'm still supposed to be fixing cars. I'm still supposed to be driving. I'm supposed to have both of my feet. This is not the way my life is supposed to be at age 40. Okay? And so all of us sometimes get into that negative pattern of thinking. But to answer part of your question, I lost hope. I lost faith. I felt like, well, what kind of life coach am I if I can't even think of anything else good to say to cheer up my husband? But it is a draining thing. Caregiving someone that you are in love with is very draining. It is exhausting. And so nowadays, I give myself that grace to say, you know what? You did a wonderful thing. You did a thing that there's not a whole lot of other women would do. His
Yeah.
mother's told me that, and a lot of other people have told me that. You stepped up in a way that probably nobody else would have. So you fulfilled the purpose that God had for you at that time. And maybe it's possible, perhaps, that you were put into his life for this season. And even though for you it's a loss because you finally found the one, but for him, it was a way to usher him into heaven in a way that he wouldn't be alone. And so
Wow.
that's what I choose to believe. You know,
Mm.
I could probably make up 12 other scenarios, but
Yeah.
that is what I choose to believe because that is the thought that empowers me and that moves me forward, not the thoughts of the what if this and if only that. That is a disempowering thought. And we have to change our mindset about things. And
Mm.
so, like I said, being a person of faith, I know that God is sovereign and there's some things that I will never understand, but
Mm.
I have to trust that my purpose in being in his life for that short, just under 2 year period was not for me. It wasn't so that I could have a mate. It wasn't for me. It was for him. Or maybe it was to show someone else what love really looks like. Maybe I was a model for someone else that I don't even know about. You know, life is bigger than just us. It's not about me, and you. And what was the other question, Jumi?
The other question, oh, I love it. That's why I kept quiet. That was good. Before I go to the other question, I thought it was interesting that you said, even though as a life coach, that you didn't have anything else more hopeful and more positive to share. I think there are times in life that life grabs us by the neck and so tightly that there literally isn't anything else good to say, because I have sat in sessions with clients that have been going through so much that there's nothing to say. And it was so powerful to hear you say that, because somebody's going to be listening to this and they're going to be like, yes, that was me. Should I have had something to say? Should I have been hopeful? Should I have had more positivity? You were just being human, you know?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Uh,
It doesn't diminish that title. I mean,
yes.
I still empower people. I still speak life. I still positive 90% of the time. It's
Yes.
just that, this is a particular situation that hit home in a way that it never had before. But I really want you to get that some of these things that happen to us in our lives are not because of us, or it's not for us. It
Mm.
might be to encourage or empower or mentor or teach someone else.
Absolutely. All right, let me give you the second question. The second question that I asked was about changing identity. How have you been able to manage that from wife to widow, from somebody that was
Yeah.
married to someone that became single?
Yeah, yeah. That title has changed quite a bit because I remember when I was single, then I was a wife, then I was a single mom, which has a connotation that sometimes I'm a baby mama or something, and we could go all day
No,
with that. And I'm divorced. I'm not saying that I'm better than women that are single and they weren't married, but I was divorced. So I have tons of different titles going back and forth, yo-yoing around. I choose to not fall into society's definitions of what a title is. So if someone hears me say I'm a single mom, because I am, they could think lots of different things that come with that. Their definition doesn't define what I am as a single mom. I happen to be a woman that does not have a partner, and I'm a mother, and I'm raising my child. She's a teenager. So I don't know what will happen when she's out of the house. Am I still a single mom? I don't know. But I remember, Jumi, when I first moved into the 40s category. You know how like you're checking off, demographic things on a
Hmm.
form. You're putting your name, you're putting your address, and then it says age, and it's like 30 to 35, 35 to 40. And I remember the first time that I had to check the box with the 40s in it. And I was like, bruh. I mean, I don't mind being in my 40s, but I'm just saying, like, so it's like someone is always going to have a box for you to tick off and define what that makes you. But no, you decide what makes you. God decides what makes you. Other people in society aren't what makes you who you are. So I haven't really had a difficult time navigating that term. The only thing that I really needed when I first became a widow was to try to connect with other widows, especially those that were younger, because I remember the church groups and things like that. All the widows were, in their 60s and up. That's not to say that we didn't have anything in common. Of course we did. But it's just different when you can relate to someone that's sort of in your same stage of life.
Yes,
And
yes,
so
yes.
I put that out there shortly after his passing, and there were people that immediately were able to connect me and say, listen, I know these different women, they were in their 20s and 30s when they lost their husbands. And maybe you guys can, encourage each other. And that's what you need. Again, going back to the very beginning, women supporting other women. Life is going to happen to all of us. So you may not lose a spouse or a partner, but there's going to be losses in life, all kinds of losses. And one day somebody will lose you. And so we just have to, think about other people and be sensitive to other points of view and not be so quick to judge, what other people are going through. I mean, unless you really, 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 really know, I don't think that you should do that. Certainly not from what you see, in the news or social media or some gossip. So I'm lucky and blessed to not have succumbed to what society says about widows.
Yeah. This is my last question for you. Remembering. I think that for a lot of people that have not been the one that had the loss, they don't know how to support the person that experienced the loss. So what would you say to not just the person that has experienced the loss, but also the people who are around them, how to help them with remembering? Are they supposed to mention the person's name? Are they supposed to talk about the person? How do you honor your husband? How do you remember him? And what would you say to others in how they support other people in remembering their lost loved one?
Well, we talk about him a lot around here. There's a TV show that comes on or an actor that shows up on the screen that he liked, or a movie that he loved to watch because he was a big movie buff. He was really funny. He liked comedians, anything like that. We would talk about them, and we would talk about him. We would talk about the way that he would talk about them, stories he would tell. We honor his birthday. We honor holidays and special times the way that we always did. And we don't forget him, and we don't act like he didn't exist. So even though I wasn't with him long, we don't act like he didn't mean anything. He meant something to me. So I talk about him. And to this day, no one has come out of their mouth and told me that I need to stop talking about him. If they did, that's probably not going to be a person to be associating with very much anymore. What I'm saying to you is, whoever you've lost, you honor your memory of them the way you want to. Maybe you guys used to take walks together. Maybe there was a certain song that you guys loved, or a movie that you really loved to watch together. Maybe there was a particular city that you guys like to visit over and over again, or a certain topic that you like to, talk about and explore, a certain restaurant you guys like to go to. So whatever that is, if you're comfortable with it, do it. Some people will avoid those places and be like, no, no, no. But you want to make sure that you don't deny that relationship. Whatever that was that it meant to you, it was real, and you should honor it. That's going to help you heal. Doesn't mean you're going to get over that person, or that you'll ever stop thinking about them or missing them or loving them. It just means that you will heal, and the way that you will look at their life and the experience won't be colored by sadness and despair. It'll be colored with hope and encouragement for someone else, like what I'm trying to do today. And if you can, do what I didn't do. Really engage in self-care. It doesn't necessarily mean baths and massages. It can, but it just means anything that makes you feel good, that is not a behavior that's going to sabotage you. Having promiscuous sex, that's going to sabotage you. That's going to hurt you in the long run. Overeating and having an entire cake or entire gallon of ice cream every night, that's not going to empower you. That's going to lead down a poor path. But I'm talking about actual self-care that is going to enrich your soul, whether it's honoring him or just doing something for yourself. And I also want to say that there's not just one right way to do grief. So whether you are grieving someone or you're supporting someone that's grieving, you have to acknowledge their way. You have to be kind to yourself. Don't put like crazy limits on yourself. Like, oh, I shouldn't still be crying about this. It's been a year. It's been 2 years. It's been 5 years. Why am I still crying about this? It's because of whatever. It's because of your love. It's because you don't have to define it and analyze it and try to stop it. Be kind to yourself. Be patient with yourself. Express your grief the way that you need to express it. Maybe you want to talk like I do. Maybe you want to scream. Maybe you want to like throw something. I just ask that you don't damage anyone or anything in the process. Maybe you want to throw a pillow at the wall, that won't damage anything. But really, you got to do you. And the last thing I'll say about healing and all that is that time itself does not heal all wounds.
Ooh.
What I mean by that is that if there was something that was unsaid with your loved one, you may not be able to say it to them in the physical form, but you can still say it. You can still write a letter. If there's someone that is grieving you and they're not dead, maybe they hurt you in a powerful way, maybe they abused you or something. Time does not heal all wounds. You have to actually do something to facilitate that healing, whether it's talking to someone like Jumi or taking walks, journaling, crying and screaming and throwing things, whatever it is that you need to do, finding a community of people at a local church or, maybe really close friends that get you, that aren't going to, make you feel bad for how you grieve. That's what you need. But just the passage of time itself doesn't make everything okay. Pretending something isn't there doesn't make it okay. You have to be proactive.
Wow. Daree, I could have you here for the next 2 hours. And I know that we would just keep going. So I just want to thank you for being willing to share your experience and by doing so, blessing other people. I don't know what it's like to lose a spouse. I have had losses, but not a spouse. And so I know that I cannot speak to that topic. And thank you so much for sharing that experience and allowing the space for the podcast space to be a holding space for women or even men who have lost their spouse. I thank you so much. So now I would love you to tell other people, everyone listening, how to get a hold of you because you're so good. They can't just listen to this podcast. They have to find you. So let us know how to get a hold of you.
Yeah, I have much happier topics that I talk about, so this is not it. But my podcast is called Kicking It with Daree. Also, you can find me at DareeVoiceover.com. I'm a voice actor, so if there's someone listening that maybe needs narration for a web video or a podcast or maybe an online course or something like that, take a listen. You already heard my voice, but you haven't heard me behind different kinds of scenarios. So, and audiobooks too. I love reading books. So you can get a hold of me there. And I'm on social media everywhere at Daree Allen. So just my name.
Thank you so much, Daree, for coming to this podcast, Life, Love, and Therapy. I really appreciate you so, so much.
Thank you, Jumi. I appreciate being able to share my story and hopefully it helps someone.
That is it for this episode. Thank you for joining. If you're looking for ways to help this show, please leave a nice review and recommend this podcast to your friends. Also, don't forget to like me on Facebook at Jumi Olawale Therapy and Counseling and follow me on Instagram at Jumi Olawale The Therapist. If you have any topics that you would like me to cover on this podcast, please reach out to me via Facebook or Instagram. And you can also send me an email to jumiolawale@gmail.com. This is your host, Jumi Olawale. Thank you for listening and see you next time.